Inside a small locked drawer in a private office at Clarence House sits a plain leather-bound register. It is about the size of a paperback book. It has no royal cipher on the cover. It has no gold lettering. It has no crown. Just a plain, dark green cover, worn a little at the corners, with a small brass clasp on the front. Inside the register is a list. That list carries the names of every royal child in the family, and beside each name are the dates and details of every small, formal presentation that has ever been planned for them. That register has been kept for the last 3 years by Queen Consort Camilla, in her honorary role as chair of a small internal royal committee. And last week, in a private meeting at Buckingham Palace, Prince William walked in and quietly asked for the register back. Prince William formally requested this week that the Family Presentations Committee, a small honorary body within the royal household, be dissolved and its responsibilities transferred directly to William and Catherine. The committee had been chaired, since Charles's accession, by Queen Consort Camilla. The role had given her honorary input into how the Wales children, and eventually any future royal grandchildren, would be introduced to public duties. It had never carried public authority. It had never been mentioned in any palace statement. But it had, quietly, shaped small decisions that touched George, Charlotte, and Louis directly. And then William did the unthinkable. William asked his father, in a private meeting with 3 witnesses in the room, to sign a household rescript ending the committee and folding its responsibilities under William and Catherine alone. King Charles, after a long moment of silence, signed it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you do not miss a single update. The meeting took place on a Thursday afternoon in a small drawing room on the ground floor of Buckingham Palace. William had arrived with Catherine and with his private secretary. Charles was already seated at a small writing desk when they came in. On the desk sat the plain leather register, delivered that morning at William's request. Beside the register lay a single-page document, prepared by the palace legal team, which William had asked to be drafted the week before. Anne had been invited but had chosen quietly to remain in a nearby room so that the moment would belong to William and Charles alone. A household rescript, in plain words, is an internal royal document that formally changes or ends an existing internal palace arrangement. It is not a state document. It is not made public. But once signed by the sovereign, it carries the same weight inside the palace as any formal royal instruction. The rescript William had asked for was 1 page long. It named the Family Presentations Committee. It confirmed its dissolution. It transferred every one of its responsibilities directly to William and Catherine as parents of the Wales children. Charles read the document slowly. The king did not speak for almost a full minute. Charles then looked up at his son, held William's gaze for a long moment, and set the paper down again without signing. Catherine felt William's hand tighten around hers. William did not press. William simply waited. Charles then asked one question. Charles asked whether the request had been discussed with Camilla. William told the truth. William said that Camilla would be told immediately after the signing personally, by William himself, and that Charles would join him for that conversation if he wished. Charles felt hesitation first, then love, then a settled quiet. William felt calm first, then resolve, then a gentle protectiveness for the aunt and grandmother he did not want to complicate the moment for. Catherine felt tenderness first, then quiet strength, then a determination to make sure the moment landed cleanly. And Anne, in the room down the corridor, felt only the plain readiness of a person who had been asked to stand nearby if she was needed, and would not intrude if she was not. Charles looked at the register on the desk. The king remembered, in that moment, the afternoon 3 years earlier when he had first quietly asked Camilla to hold the honorary chair. He remembered the smallness of the request. He remembered Camilla's careful, grateful nod. And he remembered, too, the private conversation he had shared with William only a few weeks after, in which William had, in his own understated way, expressed a small reservation. Charles had noted the reservation at the time. Charles had not acted on it. Charles had believed then that the arrangement would settle. According to a documented household account prepared for senior aides later that week, Charles had spent the intervening years quietly watching the committee's operation. The account noted that no serious mistake had ever been made under Camilla's honorary chairmanship. It also noted, however, that several small decisions had, over time, drifted in ways that had not fully aligned with the private wishes William and Catherine had expressed about their own children. The account did not name any specific decision. It did not need to. Charles had already understood over the past year that the drift was real. Charles picked up the pen. The king held it in his hand for a long moment, and the room felt every second of the pause. Catherine watched him. William waited. The private secretary stood near the wall, motionless. Then Charles said softly, one sentence to his son. Charles said, "This should have been done a year ago." And then Charles signed the rescript. The signature was clean. It was not hurried. It was not slow. William watched his father sign, and the prince felt, in that moment, both gratitude and a quiet grief for the fact that his father was, again, quietly closing off pieces of an arrangement that had once been built with love. William did not say anything. William simply took the signed document, folded it in half, and placed it inside the plain leather register. That, in its own small way, was the end of the committee. And then the story turned backward, because none of what was happening in that small drawing room could be understood without the 3 years of quiet decisions that had shaped it. The Family Presentations Committee had been established 3 years earlier, in the early months of Charles's reign. The purpose had been simple. Charles had wanted, in his own careful way, to give Camilla a small internal role that would place her more securely inside the working structure of the royal family. He had chosen a body that was practical, low visibility, and unlikely to attract attention. He had believed at the time that a modest operational responsibility would help settle any lingering questions about Camilla's place in the family. The committee had never been large. It had consisted of 4 people, Camilla as honorary chair, a senior palace advisor as operational secretary, a representative from the household of the Prince and Princess of Wales, and a rotating 4th member drawn from the wider family, most often Sophie, occasionally Anne, and sometimes a senior lawyer when specific matters required it. The committee had met 4 times a year. Its remit had been narrow. A remit, in plain words, is the specific set of tasks and decisions that a body is authorized to handle. The committee's remit had covered small formal moments, the first appearance of a young royal at a public event, the wording of a small palace note announcing a new patronage for a young family member, the scheduling of a school visit, a charity engagement, or a family photograph that would be shared with the public. Nothing large, nothing state, nothing ceremonial in the great sense. Only the small, quiet moments that added up, over the years, to the shape of a young royal's early public life. Camilla had chaired the committee carefully. She had not overreached. She had listened to the Wales representative on almost every matter. She had, on more than one occasion, deferred to William and Catherine when small disagreements had come up. But according to a private palace briefing shared with senior household staff during the previous year, 3 specific decisions had, in the committee's history, gone forward in ways that had not fully matched what William and Catherine had requested privately. The first had been a school visit, arranged in Camilla's committee, that had involved a photographer arrangement William and Catherine had not been shown in advance. The second had been the wording of a small announcement about a young royal's participation in a charity event, which had described the child in language William had not agreed with. The third had been the scheduling of a formal family photograph, moved to a date that had cut across a private family arrangement William and Catherine had asked to be respected. None of the decisions had been harmful. All of them had been small, but each of them had, in its own way, told William something. Each had told him that the arrangement of the committee, even with the best intentions, gave a voice inside his children's early public life to someone who was not their parent. and William had, over the past year, come to understand that this voice, however gentle, was one voice too many. William had raised the matter privately with Charles almost a year earlier. The prince had not asked for the committee to be dissolved at that point. William had asked only whether the remit could be narrowed. Charles had listened. Charles had understood. Charles had, however, asked William to give the arrangement more time. William had agreed. William had waited. The waiting year had not changed the pattern. According to a documented household account prepared for the palace legal team early that autumn, 2 further small decisions had drifted through the committee's ordinary process in ways that had, again, not fully aligned with what William and Catherine had asked for. Nothing dramatic, nothing scandalous. Only the quiet, steady rhythm of a body doing its work in a slightly different direction from the parents. By late autumn, William had made his decision. The prince had discussed it first with Catherine, over several evenings in their private sitting room at home. Catherine had listened. Catherine had asked William only one question. Catherine had asked whether William was ready for the conversation with his father. William had said yes. Catherine had said only that she would be beside him for it. William had then discussed the matter with Anne. The princess had listened to her nephew for almost an hour, in a small kitchen at Gatcombe on a cold Sunday afternoon, without saying much. When William had finished, Anne had asked only 3 questions. Anne had asked whether the pattern was real. William had said yes. Anne had asked whether he had given the arrangement enough time. William had said yes. Anne had asked whether Charles was ready to hear it. William had paused and had said he thought so. Anne had nodded once, poured William another cup of tea, and had said only, "Then do it properly." Nothing shouted. William had also, quietly, told Sophie. The trusted confidant had by then sat on the committee twice as a rotating member. Sophie had not been surprised. Sophie had told William that the arrangement had never quite felt like it belonged to the parents. Sophie had also said, in the same conversation, that Camilla would understand once the decision was made. Sophie had known Camilla for many years. Sophie had rarely been wrong about her. William had prepared the legal draft with his own private secretary. The document had been reviewed by 2 senior palace lawyers. It had been checked twice for language that would not embarrass Camilla. Every phrase that could be read as a criticism had been removed. Every phrase that could be read as a private failure had been softened. The final draft had named the committee, dissolved it, and transferred its responsibilities to William and Catherine, without offering any explanation. That, in itself, had been Sophie's advice. Explanations, Sophie had said, were often the parts of a rescript people used to hurt each other with. By the morning of the Thursday meeting, William was ready. The register had been delivered to Buckingham Palace at William's request. Anne had been invited to be nearby. Catherine had been invited to sit beside him. Charles had been asked to bring a pen, and a small drawing room on the ground floor had been chosen for the conversation because it was quiet, out of the way, and had a door that closed properly. Charles set the pen down after signing. The king folded his hands on the desk and looked at his son. William looked back. Catherine sat very still. The private secretary stepped forward, gathered the signed rescript, and placed it inside a plain leather folder for archiving. That, from the palace side, was the formal act done. From the family side, however, the harder work was only just beginning. Charles then asked William a question. The king asked whether William would speak to Camilla that same afternoon, or whether he would wait until the following morning. William said he would prefer to speak to her that afternoon. Charles nodded slowly. Charles said he would join William for the conversation. William thanked his father quietly. That was all that was said between them on the subject. Anne stepped into the room briefly, having been informed that the signing was complete. The princess did not stay. Anne simply confirmed that Camilla had been asked, through her own private secretary, to be available for a private conversation in a small sitting room at Clarence House at 3 o'clock. Anne did not offer any commentary on the moment. Anne rarely did. Anne simply turned and returned to the room down the corridor to wait until she was needed again. Catherine placed her hand briefly on William's arm. The princess did not speak. Catherine simply squeezed his arm once, a small gesture that only William saw, and stepped back. That gesture, in its own quiet way, was the strongest thing any person in the room did that afternoon. It reminded William without any word that the choice had been the right one and that the harder part was still to come. Then William said the one line that everyone in the room would remember for the rest of their lives. William said, "My children's future is not a committee decision." The words were calm. The words were short. The words were spoken without anger. But the words carried the weight of every year William had spent watching his own early life shaped by rooms he had not been in. And every year he had promised himself he would not repeat that pattern with his own children. Charles heard the words and closed his eyes for a moment. Catherine heard the words and did not blink. The private secretary heard the words and did not move. Anne, back in the room down the corridor, did not hear the words at all, but would learn of them later that evening and would understand exactly what her nephew had meant. Charles then said something quietly, one father to another. The king said that he had, in his own long life, spent too many years being introduced to his duties by people who were not his parents. He said he did not want that for his grandchildren. He said he was glad William had been the one to end it. And he said, with a small ache in his voice that only William caught, that he wished he had been able to say the same thing to his own father, many decades earlier, when it might have made a difference. William did not respond in words. The prince simply reached across the small writing desk and placed his hand briefly on his father's hand. Charles closed his eyes for a second. Catherine watched them both and did not move. That small piece of grace, from a son to a father, was more powerful than the rescript itself. It was the moment the decision passed from a document into a family bond. Charles then asked William whether he wanted the family to know before the palace statement was released. William said yes. Charles said he would inform Anne personally. William said he would inform Catherine's family. Charles said he would speak to Harry through the usual private channel, so that Harry heard the news from family, rather than from the press. William thanked him. That was another kindness. That was one Charles would carry out himself. At just before 3, William, Catherine, and Charles stood, left the small drawing room together, and walked toward the private wing of Clarence House. The plain leather register stayed on the desk. The signed rescript stayed inside the palace legal team's archive. And Anne, in the room down the corridor, stood, gathered her overcoat, and went to wait for her family to return. Camilla was already in the small sitting room when William and Charles arrived. The Queen Consort sat by the window, in a pale blue armchair, with her hands folded in her lap. Catherine had chosen, quietly, to wait in a nearby room rather than to join them for the conversation itself. That, too, had been an act of respect. Catherine had understood without discussion that the moment belonged to Camilla with as few people in the room as possible. Charles spoke first. The king did not begin with an apology. Charles began gently with the facts. Charles told Camilla that a household rescript had been signed that afternoon dissolving the Family Presentations Committee and transferring its responsibilities directly to William and Catherine. Charles told Camilla that the rescript would not be made public. Charles told Camilla that no palace statement would name her and that no formal communication would be released that could be read as removing her from anything. Camilla listened without interrupting. The Queen Consort did not raise her voice. Camilla did not argue. Camilla did not ask why. She had, in her own way, understood for many months that the arrangement was likely to end. She had noticed the small changes in the committee's meetings. She had noticed the softer disagreements from the Wales representative. She had noticed the smaller number of decisions being brought to the table over the past year. And she had, in her own careful way, prepared herself. William then spoke. The prince did not use the language of criticism. William thanked Camilla for the 3 years she had held the honorary chair. He thanked her for the small decisions she had helped shape during that time. He then said very quietly that decisions touching George, Charlotte, and Louis needed, from now on, to be made by him and Catherine alone. He did not offer any reasons. He did not need to. Camilla understood. Camilla responded with grace. The Queen Consort said that she had, in the last year, come to understand that the arrangement no longer served the family. Camilla said she was glad that the decision had come from William personally, and not through a palace advisor or a statement. Camilla then said, in a voice that was steadier than William had expected, that she was, in her own quiet way, relieved. Being asked to hold a position she had not fully understood how to fill had, she said, been more difficult than the family had ever known. That admission surprised William. The prince had prepared himself for a conversation about loss. He had not prepared himself for one about relief. Camilla's honesty landed with a weight that made William, for a moment, sit down in the chair opposite her, rather than remain standing. Charles watched them both, and for the first time all day, allowed his own shoulders to settle. Camilla then asked one small question. The Queen Consort asked whether Catherine would be willing, once the dust had settled, to include her in occasional conversations about the wider family calendar, not as a chair, and not as a committee member, but simply as an aunt-in-law who cared. William did not hesitate. William said yes. William said Catherine would welcome that. William said the door to the family, from the two of them, would not close on Camilla. The Queen Consort thanked him. That was the moment, more than any other, when the difficult afternoon quietly turned into a settled one. A private protocol, in plain words, is an internal royal rule that controls how sensitive matters are handled behind palace doors. A new one was drafted the following week to sit alongside the rescript. The protocol confirmed that all decisions concerning the public introduction, presentation, and early appearances of the Wales children would be made solely by William and Catherine, and that any request from a wider member of the family for input into such decisions would be routed through William's private secretary. The protocol was signed by Charles, William, and Anne on the same afternoon. Camilla was informed of it, gently, that same evening. She accepted the arrangement without protest. Sophie visited Camilla the following day for a quiet cup of tea in her personal sitting room. The trusted confidant did not raise the events of the previous afternoon directly. Sophie simply stayed for over an hour, talked about small, ordinary things, and made sure that Camilla did not spend the day alone. That, in its own small way, was one of the kindest things any member of the family did that week. The story reached the public through the smallest possible palace statement, released 2 days after the meeting. The statement confirmed that a small internal arrangement concerning the future public engagements of the Wales children had been formally reorganized, that the Prince and Princess of Wales would from now on handle all such matters directly, and that no further comment would be made. The statement did not use the word privilege. The statement did not mention Camilla. The statement did not need to, but the public understood. A broadcaster on the evening news framed the moment with one sentence that would circulate for weeks. The Prince of Wales has quietly taken back the last decision that was not his to hand out. That sentence did what no palace statement could do. It gave the country the language for something William had been building for years. A tabloid headline read, "William draws the line." A broadsheet led with, "Wales takes the wheel." A Sunday paper printed a photograph of William and Catherine walking with their 3 children in the Norfolk countryside, with one line underneath. That line was, "Parents only." The public did not turn against Camilla. That was, again, the surprise. Most people, when asked, said the arrangement had always sounded like something a parent should be doing themselves. Most people said Camilla had handled the moment with grace. Most people said William had drawn the line calmly, in private, without embarrassing anyone. Most people, when asked, said the family looked steadier for it. Outside Clarence House on the following Sunday, a small crowd gathered without any organization. There were no flowers. There were no candles. There were only a few small handwritten cards left near the front railings. One card near the front, folded carefully, carried a single sentence. It read, "Your children are lucky. So are we." A woman in her 40s told a reporter that she was a mother of 3 young children herself, and that she had, over the years, watched William and Catherine with the quiet respect of a person recognizing another set of parents doing their best. The woman said she was glad William had, at last, closed the door on decisions being made for his children by anyone else. The woman said before she walked away that some kinds of protection did not need to be shouted. Camilla attended a scheduled charity engagement 2 days after the announcement. The Queen consort appeared warm, composed, and, in the small ways cameras never quite capture, lighter. Catherine attended a school visit the same week and greeted the head teacher with a small smile that reached further than usual. Anne characteristically went about her duties without a single reference to the events of the week. Charles allowed the palace statement to speak for him. And William, when asked by a passing reporter whether the decision had been difficult, simply said, "They are our children," and kept walking. That answer became a small headline of its own. Harry was informed by Charles personally, through the usual private channel, on the Friday morning. According to a documented household account prepared for internal record that week, Harry had not been surprised. He had in fact said only that he was glad the decision had come from William, rather than through a statement. That, from Harry, was a small kindness the family quietly noticed. The world had watched a father quietly close the last small door. And the world, for a moment, understood. The Family Presentations Committee was dissolved by the end of the following week. Its files were archived. Its remit was formally transferred to William and Catherine. The plain leather register was returned to William's own private study, where he placed it inside a small drawer beside a photograph of his 3 children, and the new private protocol was signed and stored in the same secure archive as the household rescript that had preceded it. William did not take credit for the decision. The prince did not release a statement. William did not brief a favored journalist. William simply returned to his own routine, took his children to school one morning that same week, and spent an unhurried Saturday afternoon with Catherine and the 3 of them at home. That, in the end, was the whole point. William had not wanted a headline. William had wanted the quiet that comes with knowing that no one else was making small decisions about the shape of his children's futures. Charles did not seek to explain himself. The king did not release a follow-up statement. Charles simply returned to his desk, wrote a short private note to William thanking him for the calm way he had handled the afternoon, and placed the note inside a small drawer in his study, where it would remain for the rest of his reign. William received his own copy of the note later that week, and, in his own way, kept it for the rest of his life. Camilla accepted the change without any visible loss of her larger role. The Queen consort continued her ordinary engagements. Camilla kept every ceremonial responsibility she had held before the meeting. Camilla retained her queenly status without any question. What Camilla had let go of, quietly, was a small operational voice inside decisions that had never really needed her. That kind of letting go, in the end, was harder than most public losses. And Camilla had handled it in a way that showed she had, over the past year, become steadier than the family had realized. The lesson of that week was not about power. The lesson was not about privilege. The lesson was not even about the committee. The lesson was about a father who had spent his own early life being introduced to his duties by people who were not his parents, and who had, at last, decided that his own children would not walk the same corridor. William had drawn the line calmly, in a private room, with 3 witnesses present. Charles had approved the line at last, with a signature that closed something older than the committee itself. Britain was shocked because the country had not, until that week, fully understood how carefully William had been holding the boundary. William removed the privilege because the privilege had never really belonged to a committee. Charles approved because a father who had lost too much of his own early self was, in his last years, quietly working to make sure his grandchildren would not lose the same. And the plain leather register, resting in a small drawer beside a photograph of 3 young children, will stay closed from now on, opened only by the two parents who have earned the right to decide when it should be opened at all. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.